Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world today. And thank you for attending our Driving the Future of Transport webinar. My name is Sarah Howard-Coles. I am the Global Accounts Director here at LRQA, and I will be moderating today's event. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Everyone who is attending today will be muted automatically. In terms of questions, you can submit the questions using the question box on the navigation panel, and these will be answered by our panelists in real time. If we, for whatever reason, don't have time to answer your questions, then a member of our team will follow up with you directly, either during the session or after today's session. So just to set the scene for today's discussion, now more than ever, the automotive sector is experiencing dynamic changes. Intense regulatory scrutiny around product recall and quality processes has major consequences on how the ecosystem is monitored, as well as significant impacts on risk and compliance processes across the whole of the automotive supply chain. In parallel, the nature of supplier risk has evolved, with ESG performance and cybersecurity now sitting at the top of every business agenda. These risks are naturally greater for those larger organizations with a more diverse supply chain and more complex technologies, but are also incredibly relevant for the smaller organizations too. The challenge here is to maintain the visibility of those risks in spite of all of this complexity and those forces. Today, thanks to our panelists, we will discuss the automotive supply chain challenges openly and look at solutions that allow us to think differently about risk management. We hope from today's discussion, you will be able to see opportunities for innovation and growth in your own assurance and ESG programs, creating risk visibility strategies for not only today, tomorrow, but into the future. And with that, what I'd like to do is introduce those people on our panel today. So we have Arno, Eric, and Uri joining us today. And just to give a little bit of an introduction to their background and what they're bringing to the table today. So if I can start with you, Eric, for a short introduction.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, to offer me the opportunity to join this webinar. Really appreciate. So my name is Eric Deforge. I'm Group Quality Manager at SKF, currently in charge of quality management system and auditing inside the group. But before go deeper in this, maybe some few words about SKF. In fact, where there is movement, SKF solution can be used. SKF offering a broad product range of bearing, seals, lubrication, system and services to ensure the reliable rotation. SKF is a worldwide organization present in 130 countries with 87 manufacturing units, which is really a challenge regarding the supply chain. Our drivers are sustainability, digitalization, electrification, and regionalization. But I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to discuss furthermore this point during this webinar.
Super. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for that background. Uri, if I could ask the same from yourself, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, very happy to be here. My name is Uri Klim, and I'm based in Slovakia. I'm one of the technical ONTF experts within the LRQA. I'm primarily dealing with ONTF RAs and ISO 14001 audits primarily in Europe. And as I said, I'm responsible for the technical governance of the IATF scheme within the LRQA.
Super, thank you, Uri. And last but by no means least, Arno.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me on today's webinar, and thanks everyone for joining. My name is Arno Gasteger. I'm an associate director on Elevate's client services team. I'm based in Europe, and I work with many of our large brands and retail clients on supporting their responsible sourcing and ESG programs. For those of you that not know, Elevate is a supply chain sustainability service provider that focuses on assessments, advisory, analytics, and program management. And we became part of the LRQA family earlier this year. And we will be able to of our joint services going forward, which is very exciting. Back to Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arno. And thank you, Uri, Arno, and Eric, for your inputs for today's session. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And just to kick things off, we want to start the presentation today by looking at the overall, I guess, ecosystem and how one manages compliance risk within the industry. And one of the cornerstones of course, how all of the impact of this risk is how we work with the IATF certifications. The first discussion point for today is looking at really what are the latest pieces of information around IATF and the schemes and really the sanctioned interpretations of those schemes. Now, I know we had a couple of slides we wanted to bring up onto the screen just as a bit of a backdrop, but perhaps I could ask Uri to perhaps set a little bit of the scene here as to where the IATF standards have started and where they're evolving to.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, of course. As we can see on the first slide on the left picture, you can clearly see the overall history of ISO TS as a predecessor of IATF standard and currently IATF standard worldwide. So as you can see over the years, it's clearly visible that IATF scheme is growing constantly, and therefore the power of the IATF scheme itself is growing significantly. Although the growth over the last couple of years is not so dramatic, it's clearly ongoing and it's growing. And when we look on the right side of the picture, we can clearly see that the vast majority of the certificate is obviously located in Asia Pacific, continuing by Europe and America. Regarding the changes or the plans, obviously there are two things which really are important these days, as changes to IATF standard and the changes to the IATF rules which are governing the scheme. Regarding the IATF changes, as you can see on the slide, is IATF with the revision of the standard established a standardized process how the standards is changed during the lifetime, and it's done through the sanction interpretation and FAQs which are readily available after publication on IATF website. And this is the process IATF decided to follow, because with the revision, IATF became a standalone publication, and all the changes are governed through this web page, which makes life for all the interested parties within the supply chain much more easy to manage and much more familiar like it was before. As you can see from the changes from 2021, there was 5 changes. Major one I would consider related to the external laboratory requirements, and the most important contingency plans, where the requirements has been changed significantly a couple of times from the beginning of the standard revision. The other latest one are really minor ones. So as I said, the major one which I consider is laboratory requirement management and the contingency plan management. What's going on as an upcoming news is a rules revision, as I said, 6, which at the moment there is not much of information. There is a huge discussion behind the scenes about the changes, and initial information was that the rules supposed to be published at the end of the year. At the moment there is no clear information when the rules will be published. Second very important thing is a second revision of the standard, which is clearly one of the key projects of IATF at the moment. Initial discussion started this July. There is again no official information when the revised standard should be published. There is kind of a rumor that it might be early 24, but as I said, this is not an official information.
Thank you, Uri. And I guess as we get the information, we will convey that through as well. We're probably expecting to do and host additional webinars as that information rolls through. Thank you. And Eric, from your perspective, I mean, how has the IATF scheme and its changes impacted you, and you know, how do these future initiatives impact SKF?
Yeah, I think what Geraint mentioned, it's really important regarding the rule itself. We have not yet official release and communication. We expect to see it before the end of this year, but it's not yet confirmed. What we have seen, or at least heard, it could be possible that the way to plan the audit will be not down in number of people as it is today, but more with the frequency based on the risk. So that I think it could be really an improvement if we are in this direction. Another point was remote audit, and we are waiting also to see if it will be continued, knowing that during this COVID period we have this remote audit, which was really useful for certain area, but I will come back maybe later on this point. Regarding the ERTF standard version 2, as Johan mentioned, we have some already frequent questions, so that's improvement already defined, and that probably will be integrated in the standard, the future standard. And you mentioned, Johan, the contingency plan and also the cybersecurity, which is now more and more present in our daily life. Digitalization, I think, could be also one point which will be inside the system and inside the ERTF, due to the fact that it's things which are coming more and more in our daily life. So I think new ERTF will also support our activity again. So that's really important to have this information, and it will be really appreciated when you will come back to us also with this new interpretation of the ERTF.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Uri. And I guess also as we think about the sort of longer term strategy here for risk visibility, the next phase we need to think about, what are the kind of top challenges that you guys are addressing during your ATF audits at the moment, and obviously where that then goes in the new iterations. Perhaps, Uri, if I can go first to yourself, just to kind of provide a bit of context on what we're seeing.
Thank you. So I just took this picture as a like a glimpse of what overall IRTF scenes during the third-party audit as a key, I would say, areas for improvement. Problem solving as a first top two issues. It's clearly seen, and when I'm looking back in latest survey the IRTF did before the release of the IRTF standard quality 2020. One of the key concerns the stakeholder raised is a problem solving in automotive. And we clearly see that this problem and this area really continues to be a problem in automotive. And really our IRTF third-party audits also reflect this area as a big concern and an area for significant improvement. When we're looking for the third one, manufacturing process design output, as many of them as per standard requirement, one of issues we really clearly see these days is also an application on FMEA process is one of the core tools used in automotive quality management system. Fourth, as Eric mentioned, contingency plans becoming more and more required by the standard, more and more moving from being a paper-based activity rather to have solid contingency planning plans which are working. And a lot of OEMs, because this is not a new requirement, this comes from ISO TS, a revision of the standard, but these days apparently having very turbulent supply chain, a lot of risk and instability, contingency plans are playing much more crucial role in stability of automotive supply chain and OEM happiness. Management system analysis is another, in addition to the FMEA area, when we see, I would say, a lot of opportunities for improvement in terms of how the MSA systems are used and applied within the quality management system. Control plan, another very painful topic. As it's known, automotive auditors has to spend 1/3 of the audit time in the shop floor, having control plans and FMEA with them, checking if the manufacturing process is in line with the expectations. And control plan obviously is very deeply evaluated by the auditors. So the chances to find an issues in the control plan is pretty high. And I'm always encouraging the companies who are certified, be careful about this, because it's very easy for the auditor to pick an issue and try to use your internal governance processes like internal manufacturing process audit to ensure that your control plans and FMEAs are reflecting reality happening on the shop floor. Another very, I would say, challenging areas is a customer specific requirement. With the latest revision of IRTF, a lot of OEMs try to make the life easier, and they put a lot of customer-specific requirements demanded by OEM into the standard. Obviously, there are other players in the supply chain, Tier 1, Tier 2 customer, which also brings their additional requirements to the quality management system, which causing a high complexity of the quality management system and really require companies to have a robust process to identify, revise, and implement customer-specific requirements in the quality management system. Customer satisfaction is one of the key, I would say, mission of the standard is to make customer happy. And we clearly see that it's not always the case that companies who are RTS certified are always making customers happy. And customer satisfaction is one of the key areas of focus, looking at especially these days when suppliers having problem with the deliveries and quality. Customer satisfaction is another area which we consider as a weakest point, and we need to improve that area. Manufacturing process as a 9 out of 10, and the control of production really links to an importance of the manufacturing process for the IATF. As I said, auditors has to spend 1/3 of overall audit time on the shop floor verifying that manufacturing process is robustly established and robustly controlled in order to make the customer happy. It's all about the manufacturing product, design product, and deliver to the customer. So obviously, spending that much time in the production, there are areas which we identify during the audits as a problematic. I would say it's a short glimpse. Obviously, they're similar to the minor NCs, but pretty much overall picture you can see on the slide is not changing over the last 2-3 years. So we pretty much see reversing position of some of the issues, but it's pretty much the same picture over the last couple of years.
Brilliant. Thank you for that context, you're right. And also we had a question come in while you were sort of running through some of the outputs there, specifically relating to cybersecurity and how that is a key risk topic. TSAX is the Automotive Specific Information Security Standard, and the question was, what plans, brackets if any, do LRQA have to provide third-party accreditation services for TSAX? Now, I can provide a bit of a context on that in the fact that I've been part of that discussion recently, and LRQA has applied to become an accredited service provider with ENX. Juraj, I don't know if you have any additional comments around TSAX or some of the experiences you've had with clients working in that space.
Yes, of course. Yes, TSAX is obviously all the suppliers, primarily Tier 1 suppliers to the Volkswagen Group, are mandated to have TSAX. There are several levels of TSAX, and it's clearly an expectation which customer wants to fulfill in bringing them the high level of security in terms of exchanging information with the customers and so on. And really, this request to be, I would say, certified or accredited or labeled, I would say, because as an outcome of TSAX, there is no certification, it's just a label for the clients who are approved by the TSAX. It's clearly increasing demand from our client to be accredited. We know in the past, because the TSAX started in a not very favorable period of COVID, which really also complicates the accreditation process for the new CBs because of the travel restrictions and so on. So it's a very long-term process. So we understand the importance for our client, and as Sarah said, I think we are on a good way to get it approved soon and start to satisfy our customers also with our services in that area.
Brilliant, thank you, Juraj. And Eric, coming back to you from I guess the sort of challenges perspective again, you know, what are the top challenges you've addressed as a business during your IATF audits? Could you share with us some of the stories that have come out of your experiences across the business?
Yep, I think one important point mentioned by Joran, and particularly for the problem solving, I think it's one of the topics which is also important for us. And we have noting that the problem solving non-conformity is not affected only the customer complaints. Sometimes we are really focused on this, but several processes like auditing, internal audit, and deviation, and so on. So that's really one key element we are in our focus. And that's we already implement several methodology and developing techniques and like Six Sigma to support the problem solving, and knowing that if you have a good root cause analysis, you conduct a good corrective action and preventive action. So that's we fix more or less the two major points that Joran present with this. But to have the methodology is not sufficient. We have also to develop the people and train the people. To do that, we have developed what we call Improvement Academy, where we have a specific internal training on this different problem solving. So that it's really one of the focus we have. Another point which was mentioned by Joran is the control plan. And often what we have as a deviation with the control plan, and it's a update of the documentation. Update the documentation when you have a deviation, you correct it, but sometimes the documentation is not immediately updated so that we can conduct to have a deviation. And what we think is that digitalization of the process permit to have a better control of this process. And we are really on this activities now to digitalize our processes, not only for the control plan, but for several processes to ensure that we have this update in very short time. Another topics, I don't think if we touch it, but and the experience, important experience we have is what we call a red supplier. And I don't know if you have some experience on this also, Joran, to share with us. But what we have seen that the red supplier, it was developed and exchange data directly between customer, supplier, and also certification body. And we have this classification of red supplier. I think it's good because we have continuous information about the activity through these indicators, and not only waiting the audit to have this review. The point here is it's also very good because we continue this digitalization of this type of system. The point is to ensure that we have the right data, and that it's really the key element, and we are working on this. And it's important to have a good communication also between the customer and the supplier to avoid to arrive in the right supplier list when it's not really the case. So that's one thing we take care also and drive us for the time being.
Yeah, that's great, Eric. And I think as you talked about the connection between yourselves and your customers, I mean, it's such an integral part that communication flow works. Obviously, that the margin for errors are reduced in that process, and the digitalization piece of the processes is a fundamental anchor point that SKF will be driving. So really interesting to hear that. I guess my next sort of question to you all is around really how have our clients, and this is a question for you, Juraj, as well as Eric, in terms of SKF, how have your organizations benefited from the IATF's certification? How has it improved what you're doing today? Maybe first to you, Juraj.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really very good question. So for me, absolutely top reason why I think the companies are certified and why they're doing the certification is it's really highly customer centric. It's really highly customer centric, focusing, doing everything for the customer, and also trying to involve top management in that philosophy. Really, that puts a lot of requirements towards senior management to be involved in the quality management system and really being customer centric. To help that, obviously, there is a strong, I would say, probably the strongest process approach, which really helps companies to drive the business and helping the customer to be happy. I believe, and I so far seen this as the strongest process approach applied within the quality management system standards. Obviously, to achieve customer happiness, to achieve business objectives, you really need to have a performance-based quality management system, performance-based business management system. So basically, having defined objectives for all processes, and automotive is really keen on verifying performance objectives against customer satisfaction, again, internal process performance. I believe this brings the results which really everybody who is in automotive wants to see. And last but not least, all this brings really a continuous improvement culture. and IoT is very keen on improvements and create environment and motivate the people to drive continuous improvement, not only coming from a project-based related improvements, but also from a small Kaizen, small incremental steps within the quality management system in order to build up a very robust and stable quality management system. Last but not least, when the certification happens, really to give the companies opportunity to show that we are a credible supplier. We are a credible supplier to our customers. We are a credible supplier to the rest of the supply chain. So I believe we know that the ITF is considered as an entrance ticket to the business. Sometimes really not a voluntary decision, and it has to be that mandatorily. But I do believe overall benefits of the standard are way better, way bigger than the cost of overall certification towards the clients and towards the supply chain.
It's a really interesting perspective, and as I listen to you put those in order, I would hazard a guess that some of our clients sit with only maybe one of those in place, and maybe the other two are, or maybe one of them is a bit more aspirational. And the one I'm thinking about is that top-down involvement of management and that customer-centric mindset. That is, in some cases, more of the ideal than the last point you raised, which is, making sure that you've got the credibility with your suppliers and your ecosystem. I guess then we sort of switch it more into, one of our client lenses here, Eric and SKF. How do you see this in your organization? How has IATF helped SKF develop its processes and its response?
First, what I fully agree with what Julian said regarding the presentation and the fact that we have a standard with a customer centric, so that it's really the key element and really important point in the standard. Another point that Julian mentioned before in the presentation is that we have seen a good progression of IATF certification worldwide. And that's also linked to the tools which are already defined in this that facilitate the standardization of the process. And as I mentioned before, we have also a worldwide organization, and these common tools are applied in the different sites and facilitate the communication between the different units, independently of the work location in the world. So that it's really helpful for us, because with this base, we can exchange information. If you are located in China or in Europe or in the US, you have the common language, and that's really the basic things. The other point that Julian mentioned, and it's also good for us, is that the process approach. The process approach with the KPI you mentioned, and we have really to push in this direction and permit to involve all the actors inside the organization, and not only the production as it was before, but really enlarge the audience to non-production part, and it also involves the management, and the management also supporting the continuous improvement. So that's what really we like in this standard, not only IATF, because the ISO also has a similar approach. So that's really supporting the development of SKF also in this direction.
Brilliant, thank you, Eric. And I think what's exciting for us is just hearing real world examples, right? It's all very well and good us as an accreditation body providing our context, but actually hearing it from what's happening on the ground in real time is wonderful. And I think what we'd like to do now is actually shift the focus to those attendees who are on the line today. We actually wanted to run a poll, give you the opportunity to share your opinion. Now, this poll is up on screen. You can see the questions there, and you'll be able to answer the polling questions in the poll box on the right of your screen in the control panel. And the question is, how do you feel about the new IATF 16949 orientations? So if you could select one of those answers, and then what we'll do is we'll provide those results shortly. And I can see no one's nervous, so there's no nervous folks on the line, which is great. But we're having a pretty even split between excited and not sure. Things are shifting a little bit, so this will shortly close out. And I get the sense, much like we had at the start of the call today, that there we go. Yes, that the lack of information coming down the funnel is unfortunately driving a little bit of confusion, a bit of anxiety. Well, not anxiety, but just more confusion about what comes next. I need more information. So thank you everyone for providing that poll response. And as I said, we as an organization will be looking to bring any data to you as we have it and move things hopefully in the right direction for you all. So moving on to the second part of today's discussion, really around the supply chain disruption piece and bringing in a little bit more of the insight from Arno and his team as well. We wanted to first look at the causes and the sort of direct consequences of those causes in the supply chain disruption currently happening in automotive. So I think, Uri, you wanted to set the scene a little bit, and then I know Eric and Arno wanted to then comment. So if I can hand over to you for a bit of scene setting.
Yep, thank you. Yes, looking from an RTF audit perspective, and what we clearly and frequently hearing from our clients is material unavailability, which causing headaches for the clients to produce and to deliver, combined with a significant increase of transportation costs, especially from overseas, Asia Pacific, when a lot of materials are delivered to the factories. On the other side, I must say, there are also, I would say, positive aspects of it, which really brings on the table the things which was not really that obvious and that frequently applied in the past, and it was really localization of the supply chain whenever it's possible and feasible. Also, the higher transportation cost brings a better position of the European suppliers, let's say, in terms of competitiveness and being able to provide the same material for the same cost in Europe, and also being able to better diversify our supply chain if possible. So this is basically from a customer perspective, this really causing our suppliers headache when making customer happy. From an RTF audit execution point of view, we noticed in several cases that these stoppages basically causing the situation when client has to stop operation, which really causing problem to carry out the planned audits on time. Because one of the requirements to carry out the third-party audit is that production has to be running. And obviously, when you have a scheduled audit upfront, a couple of months, and suddenly in the last minute, client saying, we can't do a production, so we cannot do an audit, that causing the problem also to postpone the audit, because obviously diaries are really tight and there are other clients waiting for the audit. So recently, we also experienced such a situations in terms of being able to carry out audits on time.
And those sort of real world situations, I would imagine, in Eric, in your context, play out across all of SKF's footprint globally. Be interested to get your perspective on supply chain and the disruptions within it, and what impacts you've seen.
Yep. And to have a root cause analysis, and in fact to see the opposite side of you run for the planning of the audit. But here, in fact, we have two tragic main causes which disturbed quite a lot of our supply chain. First, which happened in 2020 and unfortunately still continue today, it's a COVID. So that's we affect quite a lot of this supply chain. And the second one is the Ukraine war. So that affected more European, but not only. So that's the two main causes we have identified. As a consequence, it's difficult to maintain a stable production flow due to the shortage of component. We must adapt our production to complete the flow aligned with the customer needs. So that's really important. Even worse, our flow could be affected also sometime by flow independent of our control. So just to give you an example on this, in 2021, we recovered the automotive market situation 2020 linked to the COVID. We have put a lot of effort to maintain the supply. We receive additional order from automotive customer to adapt our production accordingly. And comes the issue with electronic components. So that's probably you heard this, electronic components was not available in the market, which stops the flow at the customer level, and we have affect our production as a consequence. The only way to manage this is to have a very good connection with the customer and continuously adapt our flow of production. Sometimes you can predict, you cannot predict also this type of issue. So that we have one example also with the climate issue. And to illustrate, we had one case like this due to the unusual floating situation. In this type of case, thanks to the good contingency plan we have in place and the standard way of producing the different locations, so that we can balance our production to one location to another one. But again, it's a disturbance in the material flow and also a supply chain. So just quick conclusion on this, it will be to serve our customer in today rapidly changing market requires the cleanest, smartest, safest, and most efficient and flexible factory in the world. So that's really a key point. And this factory need to be close and come back to your point, Rand, close to the customer. And the supply chain is now more localized in order to serve the customer and to ensure short lead time and short transportation requirements, which we see two benefits, as you said, first in the flow and for the carbonized imprint, so print. So that's really our discussion direction and in line with the driver I mentioned before.
Thank you, Eric. And I think what stands out for me in your description there is really thinking about that adaptability and the contingency planning that your business has put in place. I mean, that's fundamental to this whole shift and everything we're experiencing at the moment. And that ability to sort of view supply chain shifts and pestle factors that may be influencing some of those risks are, to be able to do that in real time and to have more data on that type of space is incredibly important. And I know, Arno, that's something you and your team have been looking at. So it'd be great to get your perspective on how you see supply chain disruptions and what sort of data you're seeing coming back from the world around us.
Sure, and I think it's a really interesting question, Sarah, because I think we see human rights concerns in supply chains as both the cause and consequence of supply chain disruptions. I think one of the major causes is increasing legislation that's popping up around the world that we see have an impact on supply chains and especially ESG topics within supply chains. It's something that we maybe don't see in the automotive sector specifically as much yet, but I would like to provide a little bit of insight into another sector where we do see that legislation has a massive impact on product availability and supply chains around the world, and that's the solar panel space. So as many of you probably know, the United States earlier this year launched the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is a law that bans the import of any product originating from or including components that are sourced from the Uyghur Autonomous Region of Xinjiang, because there are concerns that any product made or processed there is made with forced labor. And so since June of this year, when the law was implemented, the United States Customs and Border Protection Agency, CBP, has seized solar panel shipments worth more than 3 gigawatts in capacity, because polysilicon is one of the main components of panels, and those that polysilicon is predominantly coming from Xinjiang. To put that into perspective, the US as a whole installed 3.9 gigawatts of solar power capacity in the first quarter of 2022. So that shows you how much of a disruption to the solar panel supply chain that law that's intended to protect human rights along supply chain has had. And I'm mentioning that in this context because the current focus of the US government and the CBP is on polysilicon, cotton, and tomatoes, but there is a lot of conversation around aluminum maybe being the next focus area. Xinjiang represents around 9% of the world's global aluminum production, and transportation, including the automotive sector, is the second largest consumer of aluminum. There are also other areas of concerns in relation to the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and that are car batteries, which include a lot of metals that are sourced from Western China. And if it's not sourced in Western China, it's often processed in Xinjiang, and companies based in Xinjiang supply some of the largest Chinese battery manufacturers. And so this is something that I think the automotive industry really needs to pay attention to, focus on understanding the supply chain all the way to the source, to make sure that the CBP doesn't have reason to prevent the import of products into the United States. And we do see that because of these regulations, some suppliers actually refuse to export to the United States, or they charge extra fees to provide the tracing documentation that will be required to make sure that the product is released if the US government seizes it at the border. And so companies may need to look for other suppliers or be prepared to absorb higher costs. So I think this is something that has potentially huge implications for the automotive industry going forward. I think two examples of where we see supply chain disruptions being the cause of human rights and ESG issues along supply chains are, on the one hand, suppliers waiting for raw materials deliveries because of supply chain disruptions, which may require the workers to put in extra overtime hours, which of course is a big labor and human rights concern. We've also seen that in our assessments in China, the transparency rates in audits, so our evaluation whether the factories actually provide true and accurate records, significantly dropped since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, partially because factories had to deal with supply chain disruptions both on the supply and on the demand side. I think another example where we see supply chain disruptions having an impact on ESG standards along supply chains are related to retailers propping up orders at the decline of the pandemic. I don't want to say the disappearance of the pandemic, but since then, the economy cooling again, demand decreasing, especially in the United States. And so we see a lot of brands, retailers, and corporations canceling orders, even though in some cases production has already been finished, which causes a challenge to suppliers to store the goods that have already been manufactured and finalized, in some cases causing them to store product on the production floor, which of course is a huge health and safety risk when fire exits are blocked and so on. So definitely a lot of ways that supply chain disruptions are a cause or a consequence to ESG and human rights issues along supply chains.
Thank you, Arno. And do you know what, listening to you describe all of those factors, it makes me certainly realize that if you're a quality leader or a health and safety leader or anyone operating within the IATF schema, and you're feeding into your leadership on ESG, human rights issues, you may not even know what role you have to play. And all of those factors you've just described, one would imagine one needs to have a very close eye on, and that is a very, very difficult role for anyone to play, especially if you don't have the right sensors, either human or automated, in the business. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I think also for everyone on the line and attending today, just worth recognizing that Arno and his team have some of this data sitting in real time that we scan. So always an opportunity to learn from speaking to the LRQA team on subjects like this, and just really digging into some of the risks that might be relevant for you and your organization. So thank you, Arno. Coming back to what you said, Arno, about the aluminium, we'll go with either or factors there. makes me then think about the impact of new technology on the supply chain that we're dealing with in the automotive space. And I wanted to ask you all about where you see those sort of technology megatrends playing a part. But it's interesting you talked about aluminium being one of those elements that will be affected, because that of course goes into so many different components within this space. So maybe if I can ask Eric, just on a technology perspective, what are you seeing coming in at the moment that you think really is going to affect the automotive sector?
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for this question. I think if we stay on the global automotive industry, probably they are facing its most significant transformation ever, as it's as part of their commitment to Paris Agreement on the climate change. Growing number of countries will phase out of new combustion engine vehicles cover the next 2 decades. So that's really the change in the way to perform the business. And what Arno explained also, the impact of raw material is really also linked to this. This means the way to build the car is completely changed, so that you create a new things, and particularly with, of course, the design of the electrical vehicle, for example, to work efficiently, the motor that drives them must run at a very high speed, so that it's completely new things. And this place enormous constraints also on the component, and you have to think new components also, and developing a design of the bearing, for example, if we stay on the SKF world, that ensures that we are able to continue with the higher speed, acceleration, temperature, and electric current generated by these motors. So that's, we have the consequence, a completely new supply chain, and new component, new supplier, and sometimes new technology to consider. And that's really the challenge where we are facing now with this new way of working for automotive, and this new change, and really change also the way of working. We have another point which is important and which will impact our activity is the digitalization. Digitalization not only in the car, because we will have probably sooner or later some autonomous car. We have already seen some automatic trucks in test in north of Europe, but also the way to conduct, the way to produce, so that the digital transformation affects all the part of the value chain. Shorter lead time, faster development cycle, smaller inventory, and significant opportunities for resource efficiency. So that's all these type of things which are really arrived and where we are working on to fulfill the different requirements from our customer, and also work quite a lot with our supplier to ensure that we have no disruption, as you mentioned before, Arno.
Super, thank you, Eric. And again, I think every organization is bracing themselves for these changes and is some way along that maturity. And actually, in that context, I wanted to again engage the attendees of the group with our next poll. Thinking about how prepared you feel for your supply chain management system processes. You know, how prepared are you? Do you feel like you've got them all in place already? And again, if you want to comment on this question, you can see the poll is now open in your poll box on the right-hand side of the control panel. So do you have all your processes in place? Is everything working really well? Not fully ready? Are you sort of checking at where you are in your maturity here? Or last but not least, not sure, we need a bit more information to help us. And again, lots of organizations will be at various stages of this, potentially depending on their size, the mindset of the leadership, and really the focus that this business has, or exposure that it has in the marketplace. So interestingly, we're just sort of coming up to the closing now, and everyone's sitting right in that middle zone, which I would expect. You know, if we had everyone on the line saying, yes, we're all good, we're all great, we've got all the processes in place, then the purpose of running webinars like this would seem a bit of a moot point, right? We've got lots of people that are learning about how to respond and adapt their organizations to the world around them and the supply chain management systems they're in. So just to move on to our next sort of part of the webinar, and again, conscious of time, we wanted to circle back on the topic of ESG, and just bearing in mind that any questions that you have that you might want to ask, you can ask directly now, or you can put the questions into LRQA following this session. So I just wanted to talk about the environment, the health and safety and energy management systems that we have in place. Do you think realistically there's going to be a future sort of global standard for sustainability certification? I mean, that's a broad question to the group, but I think you're right, you wanted to add a bit of context on where we are, but whether you could answer that question also in the moment, you know, are we on the road to a global standard for sustainability?
Oh, it's a very difficult question to answer, because when we're looking at the scope of sustainability, what these days companies are looking for and to be compliant with, it's a really broad field, I would say, very requirement coming from a different customer. So hard to answer if we're ready and if we are even able to create such a very generic standard covering various aspects of safety, environment, and so on. From my side, I don't know, honestly. I don't know how to answer this question. Maybe yes, maybe no, but at this moment I would say rather not, because that would be question who would be the team who would develop such a standard, because there are so many experts involved in there, and I'm just wondering how they would, you know, build up such a broad team and come to a conclusion what should be in the standard. And it might end up, it would be so generic that everybody would rather focus on sector specific standard rather than have very generic wide standard. But that's my personal view on that.
I think that's an absolute fair point. And sustainability and ESG are certainly the buzzwords in the marketplace, right? And everyone is wanting to grab their piece of that pie, whether they're a vendor or whether they're a business looking to report against it. And I think one of the questions we need to really ask as a group here as well is, you know, how can we create a better collaboration between supply chain and sustainability departments to really get those synergies working? And I mean, you're right. I don't know if you've got any comments to that off the back of what you've just said, and then we can maybe talk to Eric and Arno on their thoughts.
Yep. First, sorry, I take the point.
No, go for it. Go for it, Eric.
I
Absolutely.
go it. Sorry, Arno. First, to come back on what said Gerard, I agree on the fact that it will be very difficult to have a common standard, a global standard. And so that's we have seen already that even for standards which are already existing, like 14001 or ISO 9001, to combine these activities is not so easy. So that's even if the structure, and I think it's a good point, that the management management system structure for the ISO is exactly the same. As you mentioned, Joran, we need so many specialists in the different areas so that it will be difficult to have a really common standard. Maybe could be a guiding principle, as we have seen in automotive, who can also cover all these topics, who can maybe help to guide us. But standard, agree with you. Very difficult question to answer today, and really involve a lot of specialists on this. So I don't think it will happen tomorrow, so that it will take some time to appear. To come back on your point, Sarah, about the collaboration between quality, supply chain, sustainability, reaching the goal that not only involve our own operation, but concerns the full value chain. So will require strong commitment and determination from everyone who is part of this chain. So that, of course, we need a collaboration. And to have the overview of the risk, you need to have a collaboration in place between all the departments, knowing that each of it has a piece of the puzzle. So you can consider that separately. Again, we speak digitalization, and I think it could be support this collaboration between the people and between the organization. And definitively, if you work on the quality area, you reducing the waste so that you have a more efficient supply chain. And of course, it contributes also to the sustainability part. So I think everything is linked. And synergy is mandatory to achieve the result.
You're absolutely right. And obviously, any decision that one makes in whichever area of the business one sits has to be done thinking about the impact on your counterpart or your colleague in another part of the business, with their focus that may be on supply chain risk, maybe on sustainability. Arno, coming to you in terms of some of the work you've been doing recently, how do you see that collaboration unfolding in some of the clients you're working with?
I think one of the key elements is that ESG topics need to be elevated higher up within organizations and be more embraced by senior leadership so that collaboration across teams is really encouraged. I think over the last few years with regulations popping up around the world, we've definitely seen that the topic has become more of a focus for senior management, for boards within corporations, and I think that's really given ESG the opportunity to be more streamlined within the organization. I think in the past we've often seen the responsible sourcing teams, the ESG teams firefighting whenever things happened, fixing issues. I think we're starting to see that it's going to be more incorporated into procurement, purchasing practices. The companies are developing KPIs for their sourcing colleagues that actually measure which suppliers they onboard, which suppliers they place production with. So I think definitely this top management commitment, elevating ESG as a topic within the organization is critical in order to really foster collaboration and make sure that it's not just an afterthought.
And the key thought there is afterthought. We don't want it to be that. It's absolutely not that. It needs to be a collaborative effort from the start. And I guess, again, sort of coming back to the group on the call today, we'd love to get your thoughts here on some of these challenges in terms of ranking them. I mean, which of these challenges are really keeping you up at night? And bearing in mind, again, the poll box is open on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You know, which of these challenges are really the ones that are the sort of at the forefront of your mind? Is it all of them? Is it some of them? Is ESG touching you in terms of the subject matter? Is data visibility a challenge and a problem within your organization? Supply chain disruptions we've obviously discussed. I would imagine that would be high on the list. And again, depending on the audience we have on the line today, will probably inform the results of this question a little bit. Coming out relatively evenly. Oh no, with a big swing, it looks like towards the end, I believe, towards the compliance processes and the risk piece being high on the agenda. But again, quite a wide spread there of concern and things that are buzzing around people's minds at the moment. And I'm conscious again of time here. We've only got a couple of minutes left on the webinar today. And one last question to the group. With these emerging supply chain risks, one of the questions we really need to ask ourselves is how can we arm our staff, our people, to be able to tackle that? And Eric, I'd love to hear from you what you're doing at SKF to really help people prepare for how they can respond, and hopefully share some of that expertise with the folks on the line today.
Yeah, I think what is important, and what you said, Sarah, the first point to succeed in this is to have the right people, the right place, and competent people, and to develop also the people. So that's really the key element. To do that, we need to train the people on these different topics. So that's as we have seen that data visibility and ESG is not really at the top of the agenda today, and normally it will be the case tomorrow. So that we need to inform the people about these different topics, and we have also to train them. in SKF, what we have, it's we develop people experience, and inside this people experience, we create some what we call academies. So that's where we can train the people in these different topics. So that's in different areas. So that we have a improvement academy, a manufacturing academy, and really we touch these different topics. This one. We have also the traditional learning method, so that we're adding focus on self-learning, bringing together with the experts, so that it could be external expert, internal expert, and discussion with a peer about this activity. And more what we have, as we speak about digitalization, we also have this e-learning which take place more and more in our daily life, so that we can have this information to bring directly through this. And definitively, we have also some local training that support the unit. As you mentioned, Arno, before, the legal part could be different from one country to another one, and it's really important to consider it. So that's also we have this local training to support this type of activity.
And within all of that, Eric, you know, again, it's continuous improvement of those programs, of that learning, of that support for your people, which is really wonderful to hear. And thank you for sharing those stories from a real world example of what's happening in your business. And with that, I think just looking at time, we're just overrun slightly. I know we had a lot more to say on the subject, so these conversations can go on and on in terms of us being able to get to the heart of how we can support those people, not only on the call today, but beyond in our broader client bases and customer bases as well. So firstly, big thank you to Arno, Eric, Uri. Thank you very much for your inputs today. Thank you to all of you for attending today as well. If you have any questions and you would like to have a follow-up conversation with any of the panelists today, please reply to the email that you would have received as the invite for this webinar, or you can contact us directly on LRQA.com and the inquiries page. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you for involvement. A really, really wonderful discussion today. Have a lovely rest of your day.